Hey, look at that.
Hey, Chris Anderson, how you
Yes,
doing?
I'm tired but well. And how are you?
I'm good. So where are you? You're okay. You're in a room. It's with a red wall and a
Yep.
beige curtain. It's
Mm-hmm.
a hotel room.
It must be.
Yeah. Where is it?
It is in Strasbourg,
Oh,
in
ooh,
France. Yeah.
Strasbourg. So
Yeah.
you're on tour?
I am, but 7 or 8 days into the Operation Dragoon tour. So the Allies have just liberated Strasbourg, and we're gonna do the Colmar Pocket tomorrow.
Okay. I saw this picture from you or your Facebook
Yeah.
post. Where's this earlier in the week?
That is just outside of Lemuy, and that is a convent that was the headquarters of the 551st Parachute Infantry Regiment during Operation Dragoon, which conveniently is now located in a winery. So
Ah, très bien.
that made history a lot more pleasant.
Excellent. Well, I also have a picture of what I was doing last week,
Yeah,
which
look at
is
that.
was on a trail crew with a bunch of my college classmates. So doing all the hard labor that 70-year-olds are so good at doing.
There looks like there was a lot of harumphing going on there.
No, there was a lot of rest breaks going on.
Oh, okay.
This is a boulder we've been moving down the hill so we can place it in the as a stepping stone in the trail we were making. Oh my God. It was hard work, but we enjoyed doing it. Hey, welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, where we talk about tours and trails. And thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for their assistance in sending us out on the road and for bringing you this show. And check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. So, Chris, the other thing, we talked about this today, we're going to be talking about Truman and the bomb, but I noted this week that the D-Day beaches have been given, what is it, UNESCO World Heritage status?
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be, I don't know, it seems a little late in the game, but
well, yeah. Well, I mean, we were saying that we don't really know what that means yet, so hopefully
does
that
that plunge, millions of dollars into restoration work, or does it just mean, hey, you're UNESCO, now new rules apply?
I would hate to sound cynical, because far be it from me to sound
No.
cynical.
It would be such a radical break from your normal approach that we wouldn't know what to do.
Right.
All right.
So we shall see.
All right. So I should take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters, especially our top shelf supporters. And we had a couple of people who had fallen off who came back as top shelf supporters this week. So we're pleased at that. And if you would like to join us, we had somebody join as on a lower level, a $10 a week level. If you'd like to become a History Happy Hour patron, you can do so at patreon.com/History Happy Hour. Yeah. So, Chris, do we have anybody out there? We haven't been live in a couple of weeks. So
we have quite a few. That's great.
What's going on?
Doreen has come back to us, and
nice.
Sandy Butterfield from Manassas,
professor of science and technology at the Stevens Institute of Technology. He is the author of Restricted Data: The History of Nuclear Secrecy in the United States. He's written for The New Yorker, Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, and many other venues. He's perhaps best known as the creator of the Nuke Map, the world's most popular online nuclear weapons simulator. And he's joining us today from France. Alex Wellerstein, welcome to History Happy Hour.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks so much.
We're good. Did you bring a drink? That's the most important question.
I did. I have a Belgian beer. The French are not that interested in beer. This is kind of the best I can do over here.
So that is a commendable beer, though. So that is well chosen.
It's fine. It took a little experimentation. Yes, you can get Leffe here.
I also have a Belgian beer here today. So, Chris, are you the odd man out?
Belveni.
Okay.
Scotch and soda.
That's not too bad. I mean, I'm not sure why you're putting a soda in a Belveni.
Well, because I have to make it last, because the mini bar only had one itty bitty little bottle. So if I could stretch it out this way.
All right, Alex, I'm sure you would really like us to get on to the topic of the show. So Truman, famously, right? Truman gave the go-ahead. We dropped the bomb. But you also say that Truman was, quote, the most important anti-nuclear president of the 20th century. And that comes on page 317. So that's the third to the last page in the book. So you spent the previous 316 pages explaining that. So it's really terribly unfair for me to start there. But in a nutshell, what makes you say that?
So why do I say that? First of all, Truman is incredibly anti-nuclear in his approach to nuclear weapons, in the sense that he's almost phobic about them after World War II. He exclusively associates them with the terms he uses. So just to not put words in his mouth, to use his actual words, he refers to them as weapons that slaughter civilians, that kill them by the wholesale, that murder people. I mean, these are not, if I were saying these things about nuclear weapons, you would think that I was not exactly pro-nuclear weapons, right? He is fairly consistent in his expressions of sort of moral outrage about these weapons in private and in public after World War II. And so that would be important anyway. I mean, you could say he's very anti-nuclear, but the fact, if that was it, but the fact that he's the president during this period in which no other countries have nuclear weapons, in which the use of nuclear weapons by the United States is not a precluded thing. He's even involved in a war, in the Korean War. And yet he very much during this whole period very deliberately tries to put the United States on a path in which nuclear weapons would not be used again, not by other countries, but by the United States. And so that's why I sort of say that there. And I fully acknowledge that, like, that does not sound like the Harry Truman that you normally read about. That's not, there's an obvious objection to that assertion, which is like, wait, isn't he the World War II, used the atomic bombs, said he never regretted it? How do you square that? Well, the book is me squaring that, but I just want to put out there, I'm aware that that sounds like a strange thing to say about Harry Truman.
So, Alex, speaking of what people usually think, and you describe what people usually write. You say there are two primary narratives in considering this question about Truman and the bomb, and what are those primary narratives, and what different take are you kind of driving at here?
So the two popular narratives, if you know any version of the decision to use the bomb story, there's one that sometimes is called the orthodox narrative. It's the sort of default one that you've known, if you know that one. I sometimes just call this the decision narrative, because it's really about the idea that they had the atomic bomb, but they weren't sure if they should use it. And so they sat down and they made, Truman and his advisors, and they made this moral calculus where they thought how many lives would be saved if we use the bomb or expended versus how many would be saved or expended if we don't. And then the question is, are you bombing or are you invading? And then they weighed that, using the bomb would save more lives. And so with a heavy heart, they decide to use the atomic bomb. That's the version that is probably taught in schools for the most part. It's my sense when I poll students of mine, undergraduates, maybe 70 to 80% of them know and believe that version of the story because that's the one they've seen. It's the most common one. The other narrative is one which we could call the atomic diplomacy narrative. It's a more revisionist narrative, which says, no. They knew the atomic bombs weren't necessary. They knew the Japanese were on the verge of surrender, and they used the atomic bomb because they wanted to have influence over the Soviet Union, over the Russians. And so it's this more calculated, diplomatic, we'll put pressure by using the bomb and establish ourselves as the big power. And that's also a decision style narrative. It just changes the nature of the decision and who's involved. The approach I take is a different narrative. It's one that's more common. The basics are common amongst scholars for the last 20 years, but have not made it outside of academia very well, which is that there is no decision. It's not a moment of sitting down and making a choice for any reason. It's not, how do we get rid of the invasion or how do we sway the Soviets? It's no, everybody took for granted who was involved in this process that they were going to use the weapon. And they had many reasons for wanting to use it. And yeah, the invasion part is part of it, and the Soviets are part of it, and they have like personal and professional reasons, and they have some other sort of more long-term reasons. Oppenheimer sort of thinks that if this is that only by making the first use horrible will you make it so that there won't be more uses down the line. So there's a lot. This is sometimes called the consensus narrative. I hate that term because there's no consensus. I would say more like multi-motivational or something. But the basic idea is that there wasn't some deliberation, that the idea that you would even need a deliberation is something that happens after the fact, when it turns out that people who are not in this small group of people are kind of horrified by it, and then they have to justify it or have objections. So mine takes that and goes a little further. One thing about that narrative is it emphasizes that Truman is somewhat peripheral to the whole process. The way General Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, put it was that Truman basically, his approach was non-interference, and that he basically went along with plans that were already underway. And what my approach does differently for the World War II part is basically ask, like, what did he think was underway? Like, what did he actually know about the intentions? Because his interaction about the atomic bomb was very minor in many ways and very constrained. He had very few information sources about it. And there's documents, and this is what the evidentiary base is, which suggests that he did not fully understand several key aspects about it. And then what I do with the rest of the book is say, okay, if that's true, how does that help us interpret Truman's opinions after World War II, which again are very sort of suspicious of the military, very suspicious of nuclear weapons, very much opposed to their use, way more than other people in his cabinet. Really just thought that they were weapons you could not use.
So, okay, well, let's go back and walk through some of this a little bit. And what's the state of the atomic bomb when Truman becomes president? What does he know about it? What is he told? What's the starting point here?
So Truman is famously not told about the atomic bomb while he's vice president. Roosevelt doesn't tell him anything about that. I'm not sure that that's deliberate. Roosevelt doesn't tell Truman anything, secret or anything about the war or anything. He has, by Truman's account, he only has like 6 meetings with Roosevelt before he's dead as vice president. And Roosevelt just never brings him into any kind of inner circle. And who knows why? Roosevelt's Roosevelt. He's complicated. But so he gets supposedly told about it by the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, basically the right after being sworn in as president. After Roosevelt dies, Truman is told about it. He's not told much. They have a meeting a couple of weeks later, which is much more extensive, and it's Stimson and Groves, again, the military head of the project, and they give him a pretty good briefing on what this thing is, what they think its potentials are going to be. Stimson is all about the long term. They're not just thinking about this as another weapon. Stimson's basically brief is, we're making a super weapon, and if it works, then it's going to completely change human history and maybe kill civilization. Like, that's a pretty strong opening, statement. We have all the materials that they read. They actually forced him to read them, and he complained about being forced to read these things. But it was about a 45-minute long meeting. That's his most extensive meeting on the atomic bomb he ever has. That's in April 1945. At that point, there is no atomic bomb, but the processes to make it are advanced enough that they can project that they ought to have at least one by the summer of 1945. So that's what Truman knows. That's his. And that's most of what he knows about the bomb, other than little side conversations or like a long conversation, and then a little update on the bomb will be appended into it until he gets to the Potsdam conference.
So, but actually, one of the other things that I guess is kind of always thrown up is that, well, part of the reason for this decision, and we'll get into that decision question a little bit later, but is that the estimated casualties for Operation Iceberg and the invasion of Japan are just so horrific that he has to make that decision. But you go on, you say in the book that Truman's claim of 500,000 deaths were that were predicted in the invasion of Japan was an after the fact justification. So has he gotten casualty estimates? I mean, would that have factored, or does he just know it might be bad? I mean, how is that impacting his decision?
It's actually fascinating. So there's this famous meeting at the White House in June of 45, where it's basically Truman and the Joint Chiefs. And this is the only time in which Truman gets casualty estimates. And the Joint Chiefs are all giving him potential casualty estimates for the invasion of Kyushu and then the whole invasion of Honshu. So Kyushu is the southern island. There's two phases of this invasion. First Kyushu and then Honshu. And the whole thing, this gets quoted by historians all the time because it's got casualty estimates, and they're not like good. They're like tens of thousands. And there's a whole debate between the various Joint Chiefs over like, well, is it going to be like Okinawa all the way, or is it going to, or are these like island hopping casualties, because those have been very high? Is that anomalous? Is that because we're doing island hopping and they have really good defensive positions and they're really dug in, or is this going to be more like a regular war campaign? And the interesting thing there is that, for the one thing, most of the Joint Chiefs are arguing that it's not going to be that bad. The only people who think it are going to be bad are maybe the Navy, and they're not a big fan of the invasion plan. But everybody else is saying it's not going to be that bad. And they are clearly lowballing the casualties. They're giving him lower numbers than they have used internally. So there are, if you go looking for casualty estimates from World War II by analysts in the military, you'll find all sorts of numbers all over the place, as you'd imagine, because it's unknown and there's a lot of, unknowables and things like that. But if you look at what casualty estimates are Truman shown, way lower than that. And it's deliberate. It's way lower than even the Joint Chiefs. The Joint Chiefs know that the potential could be higher. Why are they giving Truman bad estimates? Because they're afraid Truman won't approve the operation. They don't know if Truman, this is an aspect which I really didn't appreciate till I started digging into this. The military and Stimson and everybody, they don't know who Truman is. He has this guy who is not a politician, he's a senator. And when he was a senator, he was mostly a pain in their rears, because he was auditing their spending and trying to see if they were committing waste and fraud. And now this guy is suddenly president. He has no track record in running a war. They are afraid, and Marshall actually says something like this to Stimson on the first day after the inauguration, after he's sworn in, which is something along the lines of, we'll have to see what kind of guy this is. They don't know if he's going to look at these numbers and say, nah, let's just call it off. Let's just get rid of it. And they're giving him these low numbers so that Truman is reassured, because they know going into it that Truman is uncomfortable about this. This is a great picture, by the way, that him swearing in. You put it back up. Far left is Stimson, who's quite disturbed looking. To his right is Wallace, who was the vice president before Truman. Forrestal right there, who's also, these guys just look grim. Truman himself looks like he's about to throw up. I mean, this is a really intense situation. But part of it is, again, they don't know what this guy is likely to do. Is he going to fire all of them and try something else? Is he going to cancel all their plans? And what Truman says at this meeting in the end, in the summer, is he says, well, I'm very reassured. I was afraid it would be sort of Okinawa's all the way up and down, and you've convinced me it won't be. And then he only approves Kyushu. He does not approve Honshu. He says, well, we'll see how Kyushu goes, and then we'll see about approving the big invasion. And I just put that out there, because this is not the standard version of it. It's Truman being essentially lied to by his military, because they're afraid that if they give him an honest assessment, he'll reject their plans. And also it's Truman expressing how relieved he is that the casualties from the invasion are not going to be that bad. So I'm not saying that casualties don't matter to Truman. I'm sure they do. But this idea that that's the only thing on his mind, or that's why they use the bomb, I don't think the evidence backs that up. I think they are more than happy to avoid an invasion if they can. Their plan is to threaten invasion, but hopefully not have to do it. And they pursue a lot of paths towards not doing it. But it's not this thing where it's like bomb or invade. That's the sort of false dichotomy that gets used later in 47 to justify using the bomb.
So we're approaching August 1945. Truman's getting some estimates on on what an invasion would be, but how good is the information he has on the atomic bomb? I mean, we can look back and we know that this was a world-changing event. We know the power of the bomb hitting Hiroshima, how different a weapon it was, how potentially horrible a weapon it was. And I know you touched on this, but the question, really, does Truman really understand this yet? I mean, clearly he's going to understand it eventually, but does he really understand it as you're counting down to when the bomb is going to be dropped?
So Truman does almost nothing with the atomic bomb until Potsdam. It's not that he totally ignores it, but he gets little updates, and it's not clear that he's not like betting on it. And really, who can blame him? This is like a science fiction weapon, right? I mean, maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, but what are the odds that someone from the show me state is gonna take this on faith, right? He's in Missouri. He's also, by the way, the last president to have no college education, as an aside. Not that he's an unintelligent man, but he is not like Roosevelt up on the latest technology and things like this. The only thing he really does prior to Potsdam that indicates he cares about the bomb at all is he delays the start of the Potsdam conference a little bit because he knows that they're planning on testing the bomb in mid-July. And so he pushes Potsdam back just enough, and he tells Stimson, I've pushed it back a little to give you guys a little more time to see if we have this thing, which is kind of fascinating. What changes it for Truman is they test the bomb. This is the Trinity test. People have seen Oppenheimer. It's the middle of the movie, right? There we go. My favorite picture of it. This is the earliest photo of the Trinity test. You can see that the heat has burned through the emulsion, those black spots. I find that just amazing that they can't capture the earliest frames of it on film because it's so hot. Kind of amazing. And he gets this report from General Groves, and it's a very well-written report. It's unusually well-written for General Groves. It speaks about this bomb in incredibly vivid terms, almost hyperbolic terms. This is not described as a military weapon. This is described as essentially what you see when the world is ending or something like that, right? Has a huge effect on the people who saw it, and they effectively communicate that in this memo. And it's clear that Truman, he is grabbed by this. So he's at a low point at Potsdam anyway. He's feeling frustrated. It's not going the way he wants. Stalin's kind of a pain in the neck at times. And then they get this report that basically says, you have this weapon, which is the second coming. Congratulations. And we have all these accounts from Churchill and Stimson and other people where Truman is basically walking around with these people and reading this report over and over again out loud. He clearly memorizes parts of it. He repeats parts of it almost verbatim for decades. He will sprinkle in lines that are from this original report. It has a deep effect on him, and it changes his whole personality at Potsdam. He becomes much more forceful with the Soviets, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we know about what Truman thinks about this? One of the things Truman does at Potsdam is keep a journal, which is unusual. He doesn't normally keep a journal, but sometimes during his life he does. I think the reason he keeps this one is because he's going to give a report on Potsdam to Congress afterwards, because he does give this report afterwards and he lists things from the journal. He describes it in the journal as the end of the world prophesied in the Bible. He describes it as the term he uses over and over again is terrible. This terrible bomb. I wanted to title the book This Terrible Bomb because I thought, what a great title. And my publisher basically said, why would you hand a critic that? Why would you give a critic the ability to say this book is a terrible bomb? And I was like, you're right, but it's such a good title. But and I love the term terrible because it's it can mean bad, but it also can mean terrifying and awesome in the sort of biblical sense. So I don't think Truman underestimates what this weapon is. That's not the part that I think he's confused about, or really any of the people in his circle. Stimson tells people that he thinks this weapon is more significant than Copernicus, that this is going to change the entire direction of the human species. These people, if anything, overestimate how impactful the atomic bomb is going to be on world history. They think this is just going to turn everything over, and it does have an impact, but a lot of things continue, as you know. The thing that I think he gets wrong is about what they are planning to do with the bomb. And that's the part, what we call like the operational details. That's the part that is not in this long, wonderful memo of Groves and is only very poorly communicated to Truman by Stimson.
So, Alex, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in reading the book and listening to you and some of the other things, I don't know if contempt is the right word, but are the people around Truman, when he kind of finds himself in this position, are they kind of looking down their nose at him? Are they disdainful in a way about him and what he's going to do or be capable of?
Everybody at that time thinks of Truman as this kind of accidental president, as this kind of hick who ended up
His
being
accidency,
president.
right?
Yes. And my favorite example of this, by the way, is when he's Man of the Year by Time magazine in December 45. And what a great cover. Well, look at this cover. It's him being knocked off his own cover by the atomic bomb. That's so weird. What is going on? He's the Man of the Year, but it's really the bomb that's the Man of the Year. And that's what the article is. The article's like, there are so many more important people in 1945 than this random guy who becomes president because a great man dies. And the only reason he's important is because they dropped the atomic bomb and now he's important. And they make fun of his name. They call him the true man. Like it's like he's an everyman. I mean, the whole thing is about how this guy is such a dope and doesn't understand things. And to be honest, Truman would say the same thing. I mean, he told everybody in this time around him, publicly and privately, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm making choices, and I'm hoping for the best, and it's working out pretty well, but I am not in control of the situation, which is very honest. I mean, this is the most awful responsibility, in part, is the title, is him suddenly being thrust in this position where now his first foreign policy meeting is with Stalin, face to face. I mean, he is not prepared for this, right? He has no experience, and he knows that this is the case. And so they are kind of contemptuous of him. They think of him as somebody to be sort of led. They begin to change their view of him. After the war, he starts putting his stamp on things. Even during the war, he starts shaking things up a little bit. But he's very careful early on because he really doesn't want to mess up the war. And so he's very careful to tell all these people, hey, whatever Roosevelt wanted, that's fine. That's what we're going to do. I think they underestimated him quite a bit, but yeah, I think contemptuous is not a bad way to put it. At best, they're a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Nicer than contemptuous. They sort of think that he's doing his best, which is a little unfair.
What is it? Dismissive with faint praise? What is it?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like they're patronizing,
Yeah. So, okay. You've alluded to this, but let's get down into the heart of this. I think many of us have the image that Truman makes the call on dropping the bomb.
That was going to be my next question. So good.
Well, it's the heart of the book, right?
Yeah.
And you write, the decision that Truman thought he had made about the bomb was not the decision that he actually made.
Yeah.
So,
but I'm going to add on to that, but
go ahead.
Saying he doesn't actually make the decision.
Right.
Which you really got to get into because
right. So unpack this for us.
So the way the decision is being made, one, everybody who's involved in the high level planning of the bomb assumes it's going to be made, assumes it's going to be used one way or the other. There's two committees that are in charge of working out various angles of this. I won't go into the details, but think of one of them as the military committee. It's the target committee, has scientists on it. That's asking, like, where should we drop this bomb? What kind of target? Very operational. The other is the interim committee. It's run by Stimson, has a bunch of other people on it as well. And it's basically like high level. Should we warn Japan ahead of time? Should we not? What's our general policy going to be? What should the presidents say afterwards? They're the ones who write the press release, basically. And at no point do either of these committees ever ask, should we ask the president whether we want to do this? It is taken for granted that, of course, like, what would the alternative be? They can't imagine it. There are people on the Manhattan Project, by the way, who can imagine it. I don't want to make it sound like nobody could imagine alternatives. There are scientists at this time who are trying to petition Truman to say, don't drop it on a city, drop it as a demonstration. Then, if you have to, and that doesn't ever get to Truman. They deliberately block that out because Groves and Stimson and those people do not want this to be on the president's plate. And so there's no question in their mind that they're going to use it. They sort of view it as, if we tell the president what we're doing, then that's consent, if he doesn't stop us, essentially. And he doesn't stop them. He has no interest in stopping them. He never shows the slightest interest in making a decision. So I'm not saying they're wrong in this, but it's just interesting that this never seems to even come up. Like, they never even talk about the fact that they're not asking his permission, that they just assume that, of course, that's what he wants to do. So what does Truman actually do on this thing? One is this non-interference. Like, he's given some information and he says, like, hooray. He doesn't say, please stop or let me make more decisions, right? He sees the press release and approves some of the final language of it when it goes out. The press release, by the way, has blanks for where it's dropped. It does not say it's a city. It does not say Hiroshima. It says, at some time this weapon was dropped on insert target here, essentially, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have had any extra communication on it, except that he asked Stimson at one point what the timing of it was. And that wasn't because he was making some keen intervention. He wants the bomb to be used after the Potsdam Conference is over. He thinks it would be awkward if it's used while they're still meeting with Stalin. And so he wants it to happen when everything is neat and tidy and done. And the area that he ends up making any decision on at all is this other issue that he's not involved with originally. And this is the question of Kyoto. So when they came up with a target list originally, the military planners, their number one preferred target, their target list was Kyoto, Hiroshima, and originally Niigata. And they also have Kokura, but for some reason it wasn't on that original list. But and then this gets, Stimson interjects himself into this process, even though it's not really his job to do so, asking Groves what the targets are. Groves tells him, I'm simplifying quite a lot here, but he tells him that Kyoto is on the list. Stimson says, you cannot bomb Kyoto. I refuse to let you bomb it. Groves says, but it's actually a really good target. Let me explain why. Stimson says, don't do it. There's a whole lot of things. And Groves says, okay, we won't bomb Kyoto. But then, and so they end up putting Kokura on the list, and then eventually Nagasaki is like filling in a gap there. But that isn't the end of the story. The military keep trying to put Kyoto back on the list. So Groves, in his own account, says that every time he met with Stimson afterwards, he asked them if they could put Kyoto back on the list. And Stimson said no. And Groves said in his memoirs, like, I don't think he minded, which is insane because Stimson clearly does not want Kyoto bombed. And the military representative keeps saying, can we just destroy that city that we know you don't want destroyed? And so the last version of this happens at Potsdam. Stimson gets a cable from his guy in DC, his liaison guy. His name is George Harrison, not the Beatle, different guy. But wouldn't it be great if it had been the Beatle? And he gets this telegram that says, hey, the military want to know if they could put your pet city back on the target list just in case, which is Kyoto, which is also a really awful way to talk about Kyoto, but I guess they're being in code. And so Stimson's response, he does not feel that Groves and the military are respecting his authority on this matter, and they don't. They straight up do not think that Stimson has the authority to tell them what targets to do, which is a whole other story about what the role of the civilians and the military are in World War II. But they do not respect his authority on this at all, and they are only humoring him, essentially. And so he goes to Truman with this question. That's the only place where Truman makes any real decision about the bomb. Is Stimson goes to him, they have this conversation, and then Stimson goes back and says, I have it on the highest authority that you can't bomb Kyoto. And so that ends that discussion. And so the question is, what is that discussion that they have? What exactly do they actually have two conversations about Kyoto, according to Stimson's diary. And in Stimson's version of it, Truman what Stimson says to Truman is, the Japanese really like this city, and it's an important city, and it's a cultural heritage. And if we bomb it, then the Japanese will never forgive us. And we want them to forgive us because we need them on their side in whatever's coming next. And so we shouldn't do it. And then he says, and Truman enthusiastically agreed with me. Okay, sure, fine. I don't think Stimson lies to his diary, but you're getting this Stimson's perspective on that conversation. Truman, in his own journal that he's keeping at Potsdam, he writes, I should actually call up the actual text here because I'm going to botch it if I do it from pure memory. Here, let me just look it up. Anybody else who wants to look these things up can find them on my website for the book.
Oh. What is your website as you're looking that up for the book?
It's the book. You can find it on alexwellerstein.com for all your Alex Wellerstein needs. But if you need to find that easier, if you Google Nuke Map, there's a little ad for the book on there that I put.
Okay.
And it has a link to my book page. So let me just read you this thing from Truman's Potsdam Journal. This is July 25th, 1945. The weapon, this is where he talks about first as a terrible bomb. And then he says, this weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. I have told the Secretary of War, Mr. Stimson, to use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target and not women and children. Even if the Japs, this is his language, even if the Japs are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we as the leader of the world for the common welfare cannot drop this terrible bomb on the old capital, Kyoto, or the new, Tokyo. He and I are in accord. The target will be a purely military one, and we will issue a warning statement asking the Japs to surrender and save lives. I'm sure they will not do that, but we will have given them the chance. To me, so scholars have known about this note for a long time. It's been discovered in the archives, maybe in the 70s or something like that. And it's been a nice little debate about, like, why is he writing a journal about how he thinks that the targets are going to be soldiers and sailors and not women and children, and that they cannot do this thing. Why is he calling Hiroshima a purely military target? It's a city. It does have military facilities in it, but it's not what you would call a purely military target by any means. It's 90% civilian, definitely not purely military. And there's been questions about, like, okay, is he lying to himself? Is he putting a lie into a document so that the future will think something different about him? And I think all of these are kind of preposterous. I think the simplest explanation, and there's other reasons I think this, is that he didn't understand that conversation with Stimson. That he thought that the contrast was Kyoto, the city, Hiroshima, the military base, and was agreeing to take a city off the list. And there are other things he says in this period before the first casualty reports are back from Hiroshima, which indicate that he thinks indeed it's a military base, and that the United States has done this important thing by making sure that the first use of the bomb has not been on a city. So that's one of the major things that I think that's like the major thing. I think he gets confused by this conversation about Kyoto, not intentionally. I don't think Stimson is trying to confuse him, but this is the only decision he plays any role in. And he immediately writes a diary entry that completely shows that he does not understand what's going on.
Okay, so we're getting kind of falling into the trap, I think. It's easy to do of talking about the dropping of the bomb and its effects and Second World War. But your book is about a lot more than that, and I want to make sure that we kind of go in that direction. So clearly, once these bombs go off, it has an impact on Truman. How does these two detonations? How does this change him? How does he say, "Wait a minute, this is not what I expect"? Whatever. I mean.
Yeah, that's a great question. So after the Hiroshima bomb, after August 6th, Truman is initially just jubilant, does not seem to have a care in the world. There's no reporting about it being a city. There's no anything he's read. It says nothing about it being a city. It's not until August 8th that they start talking about it as a city. They have intelligence on how many on what's been destroyed, the first pictures. They have the Japanese have started to describe the horror. And then Truman starts complaining about stress headaches and starts being kind of, seeming like he's not having a good time. Nagasaki happens the next day. The other thing that I don't think Truman understood was that there was another bomb ready to go in 3 days. That he was not alerted ahead of time that there was going to be another detonation. So I don't think he had anything to do with Nagasaki. On August 10th, he tells his cabinet that he gives an order to stop the use of atomic bombs. And he tells them that he did this because he was too horrified by the killing of the women and children. All those kids is the term he uses. Again, this women and children, this non-combatant thing. So after this period, World War II ends, etc. That's how Truman thinks about the bomb. He's almost exclusively talks about it in terms of as a weapon of killing non-combatants. And that it's this weapon that, again, exterminates, murders, slaughters, these very morally laden terms. He tells a bunch of generals in 48, this is not a military weapon. You cannot think about it like that. He tells many people that he actually is pretty enthusiastic originally about the idea that they're going to ban nuclear weapons, including the American ones. And that basically he decided after Hiroshima and Nagasaki that these things should never be used again. And so the interesting thing is, here's a guy who has very strong opinions about this, very strong, again, moral opinions. That's the basis. It's not a strategic position he's taking. And he's thrust into a world that does not give simple answers, right? It's not like the Soviets are being nice about this stuff. It's not like the path towards world government and peace and getting rid of bombs is a clear one. He goes about as far along those as you can imagine somebody doing in his time under those conditions. He is absolutely hoards the power for using nuclear weapons in the presidency. He takes the bombs away from the military, puts them into the hands of a civilian organization, the Atomic Energy Commission, which the military initially think is like an oversight, and asks for the bombs back, and he won't give them back. He eventually gives them exactly 9 nuclear cores. There's a whole story there. It's in the Korean War, not for using them. But what you see is this consistent pattern where Truman is really unenthusiastic about the atomic bomb. He does not want to threaten to use it. He does not really want to make it. He would like to at one point he says, wouldn't it be great if we could just put all these things in the bottom of the ocean? And that's kind of what he would love to do, but the world is not really letting him do that. And so that's kind of the rest of the book. The last 2/3 is Truman having these feelings that he has and his inability to really make them work in a world where things are not going in that direction. And he's sort of doing the best he can, but you're more than welcome to think that he didn't quite pull it off, because he didn't quite pull it off.
Well, one of the things I took from your book is that at that time, the generals and the Joint Chiefs, the high-ranking civilian officials, like the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, it feels like they were much more independent figures than what you see today, because they are arguing for things. They're not going, well, yes, sir, Mr. President, whatever you want, we're going to do that. There's a lot of really pretty vehement arguments going on in public at this time about what we're doing with the bomb. So these guys definitely feel like they're more independent than they are today.
Oh, I think compared to today, it's incomparable. I do think, I mean, that's just today is a very hard, is a high bar. I can't think of any presidency that's quite like today, but even the first Trump presidency wasn't quite this level of just like so much work to accommodate one person's psyche or something like that. They're relatively independent. Truman doesn't, there's certain things Truman can't deal with. MacArthur is the famous example, right? MacArthur is insubordinate, and he is publicly criticizing the president and doing things that the president thinks is dangerous, and eventually, actually sabotaging diplomatic efforts in the Korean War. And that's it for Truman. Truman's like, no, we got to get rid of this guy. And he fires a few other people when he feels that they kind of go the wrong direction. But he definitely... So one thing I think is interesting about Truman, for some of his appointments, just to make a reference today, like for the Atomic Energy Commission, he doesn't ask any single person's party affiliation before he appoints them. And he turns out he appoints like all independents and 2 Republicans or 3 Republicans or something like that. And he finds this delightful. He's like, this is great. I picked you people because I thought you were the best. People told me you were good people and it seemed like right. It was definitely not a political favor of any kind. Whatever one wants to say about Truman, he has this sense of sort of civic ethics that, you know, one is like, don't be partisan if you don't have to be partisan for certain things. Don't profit off of the presidency. He's actually pretty poor when he finishes the presidency. You know, don't set situations up that would, you know, don't create precedents that will make, you know, unconstitutional problems down the line. When in doubt, favor democracy. He's involved in rewriting the succession rules and things like that because he wants to make sure that he thinks that it ought to go to the Speaker of the House, even though that's somebody of a different party. But because that's, if you're thinking about who gets the most, which American officials have the most votes behind them, that's the person that he thinks is the most important after, you know, the president and the vice president. So these kinds of things are definitely there. His subordinates do not have infinite leeway, and they know this. So they do self-censor at times. This comes up during the Korean War quite a bit. By the time of the Korean War, the Joint Chiefs are very aware of Truman's opinions about nuclear weapons. And this is one reason why they never go to Truman and say, could we use a nuclear weapon? Because they know the answer will be no, and they will lose standing with him, and he will think they are maniacs. It's an interesting counterfactual, as if they had Eisenhower or somebody who did not have these strong opinions, if they might have suggested that as a real possibility, because not all of them thought that using nuclear weapons was a bad thing in the Korean War, but they knew that this was never going to go anywhere, so they didn't present it. There's evidence of this in the file, but yeah.
So Alex, you talk about Truman at the end of his presidency, and he gives a couple of statements, and in one, you know, he's criticizing the bombs and what they're capable of doing, and he gets a little bit of blowback from that. And you know, you discussed this. It's kind of an interesting question. I said, if the atomic bomb was an inherently immoral weapon, as Truman frequently implied, did that therefore imply that the bombings in 1945 were therefore immoral acts? So that's a big question towards the end of the show, but how is Truman reacting to that kind of...
It's really interesting because the objection he gets is from someone on the Atomic Energy Commission. And they basically say, I liked your speech, except for the part in which you said using nuclear weapons was bad, inherently bad. Wouldn't that imply, as you said, that the use in World War II? And Truman does take the time. On his last day in office, he takes the time to reply. And he says, you don't understand the atomic bomb at all, essentially. And it's way worse than any other kind of warfare. Sometime I'll talk to you about it. I don't think he ever probably talked to him about it. Completely dodges the question about World War II. Whenever Truman is asked about World War II, which happens a lot after his presidency, of course, he always says like one of two things. He either says, I don't lose any sleep over it and I don't look backwards, which I don't think is true, but it's a convenient answer when you don't want to engage with something. Fine, fair. Or he says, well, we had to do it. We had to save all these lives. And so he later, this is why also you mentioned the 500,000 lives. That number of lives he saves keeps increasing over the ages. Right. I think 500,000 is the largest he gets to. Maybe he gets up to 1 million or something like this, right? Where it's like increasing the moral burden of the thing. I don't know. I think Truman, after his presidency, I don't have strong opinions on his mental I don't want to say mental state, like his, whether he's sane, but I mean, like, what is he actually thinking and feeling about these things? I haven't looked as closely as I have as the presidency. And it's entirely possible once he's out of that office, he changes and he gets older and things like this. But I will say that I do think it bothers him more than he claims it did. There's clear signs throughout his presidency, and even after that, he was unsure whether it was the moral act. The way I think of it, to borrow a line from Hannah Arendt, I think that if Truman thought it was a necessary evil, it was still evil, which I think is a defensible kind of position. I feel like in the United States, we are, for whatever reason, Americans are inclined to believe that if we think something is necessary, then it must be moral. And I think that sometimes you have necessary things that are bad and you have to do them anyway. And that's just the way life is sometimes, or you don't feel like you have other options, or the way I sometimes explain this is I don't really morally think eating pork is justifiable under my personal moral, ethical. They're too smart. They're basically dogs, and I wouldn't eat a dog. I think it's too smart. It suffers clearly. I wouldn't do it. Do I still eat pork? I do. I just feel bad about it every time. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that contradiction. I don't need to feel like everything I do is 100% ethical, because my God, how could it be? How could it be? Every time I take an airplane, I'm like, oh my God, we're killing the climate now, but I still got to go to this conference, right? I mean, I still got reasons to do these things. And my point is just that, like, I feel like Truman did not necessarily need to, at least to himself, prove that this thing was the most moral thing. I do think he felt the need to defend the honor of the United States, which is what I think a lot of those public statements are. I do think that he felt this was part of his responsibility as the president, is to make it look like the United States is a well-run moral organization, and because that had far-reaching consequences beyond whatever his own conscience was. That's like the US in the world forever. And so I do think he felt obligated to always defend it. And he is a big perpetuator of the idea that he made this decision, even though there's so much evidence that shows that that isn't how it went down. But I think in his personal conscience, I think he did think that the slaughter of civilians was a terrible thing. Whether he thought it was avoidable is a separate question.
So Chris and I like sometimes to play inside baseball and talk to authors about their technique or things that come up. And you wrote in the book, you said the job of a historian often requires trying to reconstruct the mental states of dead people by reading their mail. But it strikes me that you also have to deal with people who, when they write their memoirs or talk about this afterwards, like Truman, as you've talked about, they try to subtly or not so subtly rearrange history to justify your actions. And it seems to me like there was a lot of that going on in this case after the war.
I basically don't use Truman's memoirs because I don't trust them, and I don't even know who wrote them. I think a lot of it is ghostwritten, and I think his aides helped him put together material. There's a lot of evidence in the archives that whenever he ran up against a tricky question, he would get about 5 people working on it. And those 5 people were not historians, and they weren't looking at, and they had a goal, which was, make Truman look a certain way. And I'm not saying the whole thing's, there are parts of them that feel like something Truman would have said. And then there's parts of them that feel like they're written by committee and the dates don't match up on documents. And they're just, so I really.
What about other memoirs? I mean, is that true of some of the other participants in this? I don't know everybody who wrote a memoir, but in terms of after writings by people like Stimson or Marshall or Byrne or any of these people, is there justifying going on there?
100%. I mean, I don't use most memoirs. The only memoirs I use memoirs are when there's things that feel like, I want to say, like the veil slips, or there's something very revealing in how they describe things. And of course, if you can make it match up with documents you have. So I check everything. That's my inside baseball as a historian. I trust nobody. I don't trust other historians. I check everybody's footnotes and I look up their documents, because I've just found way, way too many times that people acting entirely good faith can see things wrong, can make mistakes, can only see part of the story. That's I'm sure I do it too. I'm not exempting myself, but certainly people writing about themselves or talking about themselves are, of course, going to mess it up. So if I do have to use a memoir, if that's the only source I have, I try to think about how sensible that seems, who's benefiting from this story. I mean, Groves's memoir I find really fascinating, for example, even though it's completely self-serving, but the way in which it's self-serving is almost as telling as anything else, because like he is there's ways in which he doesn't make himself look good, but he thinks he's making himself look good. And you're like, great, you are just being more honest than you need to be. My favorite memoir out of all of the memoirs I've ever read, Curtis LeMay's memoir, is insane. It's the craziest thing I've ever read in my life. It's like beat poetry with nukes. I think it's a drunken oral history of Curtis LeMay. It's insane. I gotta just read you the beginning. Let me just tell you how it starts, because this is
Go for it, man.
This is in the introduction to his memoir, Mission with LeMay. This is what he's writing after he was the segregationist vice president under candidate for Wallace. He writes this, this is a self-serving about how Curtis LeMay is the best guy in the world. And it's an insane thing. And at times he sounds like he's like salivating over these weapons. I mean, he's just a fascinating guy. I've got it up. Where is the part I'm looking for? Okay. This is the last paragraph in his introduction to his memoir. I have indeed bombed a number of specific targets. They were military targets on which the attack was, in my opinion, justified morally. This is the guy who did the firebombing of Tokyo, just for your audience. I've tried to stay away from hospitals, prison camps, orphan asylums, nunneries, and dog kennels. I have sought to slaughter as few civilians as possible. Curtis LeMay. What a crazy way to talk about this. That's an insane line to put in your introduction, where you are basically known as somebody who burns countries. I've sought to slaughter as few civilians as possible. What a line. How could that not have come from him? Anyway, this is the kind of thing that I look for. It's like, oh, is there something here that's so telling that even though it's a memoir, you use it? But yeah, I'm very dubious about memoirs. I like diaries much more. Some of these people, Stimson is amazing because he would dictate a diary every day at the end of the day, and then somebody else would type it up. And I'm not saying that diaries cannot be self-serving. 100% they can be, but that proximity really changes things when you're doing it every day. David Lilienthal, I use his diaries a lot. He's the first chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, spends a lot of time with Truman. And he's writing every day, and he's writing about a conversation he had with Truman, and he quotes from memory. And did Lilienthal see what he wanted to see and hear what he wanted to hear? Of course. But one gets this composite of at least Lilienthal's Truman out of that. And then you can compare that with some other people and try to figure out, can you get at the real person? But I just want to say that line I use about reconstituting mental states from their email. This is a joke I like to tell with students when I tell them like what it is to be a historian, and they laugh because it's an insane idea. This is an insane project to reconstruct somebody's mental states based on their correspondence. And I always tell them, how well do you think I'd be able to reconstruct who you are based on your email? I mean, what is missing from that? Just so much, right? But at the same time, that's what makes this an interesting profession. It's not a science at all. It's a very human interpretive act. And that's what makes it fun for me. There's a creativity that's necessary for it.
Alex Wellerstein, write another book so we can have you back on, because this has been just a blast. Alex, as the author of The Most Awful Responsibility, Truman and the Secret Struggle for Control of the Atomic Age. And he has joined us from Paris. And Alex, we so appreciate your being here today. Thank you.
Much.
Thank you so much. If people want to see more things of my writing, especially about the end of the world and nuclear weapons, I have a blog called Doomsday Machines at doomsdaymachines.net, and it includes the LeMay and anything insane and interesting I find about nuclear war I put on the blog. So putting that out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex. Good luck.
So, Chris, before we go and before we tease next week, I wanted to thank you for something.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Because you gave me, I don't even remember where we were. Was I in your house? I don't know. You gave me this book.
Oh, see?
This book is awesome.
And you said it's so heavy. And I
Can you
said,
guys
great.
see
Yeah.
this? Right? Can you read it? Because it's backwards. It's the Cassell's Biographical Dictionary of the American War of Independence.
Independence.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's an encyclopedia. It's like the Columbia Encyclopedia of the Revolutionary War. And as I've been preparing for my trip, I have found it very useful as a checker of. It's like a Wikipedia for the Revolutionary War. Only this guy, Mark Boatner. Did you know him personally?
We corresponded a few.
Yeah, he's awesome. I mean, he's
Yes.
probably passed away now, but he's an awesome. I wish that I had had a chance to meet him and thank him, but I'm thanking you. So
I do what I can.
next week we're gonna have another historian on. Oddly enough, I don't know what.
How that
Why?
works out.
Why do we have so many historians on? What is it? What is up with that? We're going to bring back John McManus for his third show to join us to talk about his third book in his Pacific trilogy, To the End of the Earth, the U.S. Army and the Downfall of Japan. So looking forward to having John back on the show. Should be great. And
Yes.
we probably we probably gave away the ending of that book here today, but maybe people knew it anyway. So I guess it's okay. We've gone a little long today, but thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Blue Sky, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.